that 430 million people across the world are deaf? Hi guys, my name is Sadeja Carter, and today I'll be talking to you about the Deaf President Now movement. The Deaf President Now movement was a stand for justice and equality that started at Gallaudet University. This movement was something that changed the lives of people forever. And today we'll dive into what exactly the movement was and how it positively impacted the deaf community and world both then and now, 30 years later. The Deaf President Now movement was a stand against discrimination that shook the world and changed it forever. For starters, Gallaudet University is a private institute that specializes in the education of deaf students. On March 6, 1988, the Board of Trustees elected Elizabeth Ziner, a hearing woman, over a well-qualified deaf candidate. This outraged the deaf students, especially because in its entire standing of Gallaudet University, not once had a deaf citizen been on the Board of Trustees or the president. Students were outraged and decided to pour into the streets and protest. They stood behind the then Gallaudet student body president and said that they will not stop protesting until their 4 demands were met. According to Gallaudet University, those 4 demands was 1. Elizabeth Ziner had to step down as president and a deaf candidate had to be elected. 2. James Spelling must step down as chairman of Board of Trustees. 3. Deaf people had to make up 51% of the board. And 4. No student or teacher could have negative repercussions of participating in the protest. However, the protest took on a different light and used, just like in the civil rights activists, peaceful protest only and had creative tactics to draw attention to the news. According to Jack A. Nelson, Gallaudet students were angry yet controlled. They challenged law and order and took matters into their own hands. After the week-long protest, all 4 of the people's demands had been met, and Elizabeth Ziner had stepped down as the 7th president, and I. King Jordan was announced as the first deaf president of Gallaudet University. As a result of the successful DPN movement, doors were instantly open and barriers were broken. It was an example of just how capable the deaf community was despite all its biases. 2 months after the protest, in 1988, the Telecommunications Accessibility Enhancement Act was passed, forcing state agencies who use telecommunications to be eligible for deaf and blind citizens. This was a huge victory. However, 2 years after, the Americans with Disability Act became law. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, prohibits discrimination against people of disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, and services of the government and state. However, more importantly, it sparked the hope that the deaf community needed. Terry Grazzani, a former Gallaudet student who participated in the protest, states, DPN has truly made an enormous impact on the deaf community. Now deaf people worldwide can look optimistically toward the future because it's indeed bright. However, the pros didn't stop there. Now, 30 years later, we are still reaping the positive benefits of this event. One of the major things that changed was the advancement of technology for the deaf and disabled communities. According to Fred Weiner, the university's assistant vice president of administration, he states, we have computer technologies, television, captioning, so now we're very much a part of the world and society. And it allows us to do work that we couldn't even do before because we didn't have access to communications or anything with tech. This caused a surge in the deaf citizens to go to work and be a part of school because they could. In essence, the Deaf President Now movement was the first step in a revolution to fight against discrimination and inequality. The Gallaudet students and people who supported them band together like glue for the right to be represented in a school that was made for them. As the story grew, it attracted more and more eyes, giving it publicity, giving it that global span. The protests had both instant and long positive term effects. Different bills in support of anti-discrimination passed along with technological developments helped the deaf community and disability communities thrive. All in all, no one should ever feel discriminated against or feel like they can never do something because of something that they cannot control. And we've seen this so many times. This was an excellent and beautiful example of a well-demonstrated protest where people stood together for what was right. Thank you so much for your time.